probably right. She's for Hillary.
Yeah, I just heard a lion groan there. Was that you, Pat?
You heard it. Well, come on now. We got a trial lawyer here with a 28,000 square foot home who joined a hedge fund to study poverty and gets $400 haircuts. Now, look, the populist stuff, he's got something there. But, Chris, he really didn't have a great deal there. He was wiped out in the primaries. We're going to find out if he's got this big, powerful appeal. We got a test coming up, and it is in Kentucky. So we're going to find out whether it's all that big as we're talking about.
Kentucky Derby coming up again, and you suggest that he will fail this test.
My guess would be that he's going to add some points, no doubt about it. But look, then it's really a test for Barack. He's going to go into Kentucky. He's not going to avoid it. He's got the big endorsement here. He really ought to come in there and be able, frankly, as the front runner for the nomination, the putative nominee. We all say we've all crowned him. If he goes in there and gets walloped by her again, that's going to raise the West Virginia questions. What's the matter with this guy?
Those questions were raised 400 years ago, Pat. Hillary Clinton has been able to identify herself with white rejection. I don't think it's her fault entirely.
You calling people rejectionists?
Yeah, of course.
What do you reject? Chris, we've been calling the white folks in West Virginia, they're uneducated, they're half-educated.
I'm not calling them anything bad. I'm just saying they don't like Barack Obama, is all I'm saying.
Maybe they like this gal. Maybe they like her like they did in Pennsylvania.
I think she was speaking their language. He did not campaign there. People there told me that if he had shown up, we would have gotten to know him, that people there need to get familiar with the candidate, and they felt that he had dissed them by ceding the state to her virtually. Okay. So I think, if he were to campaign in West Virginia, he, according to the governor and other people there, Joe Manchin, he might have a shot at eating away at what John McCain
Pat, I'm
might
saying this, and you can argue chicken and the egg for the rest of our lives, but I've never heard of a politician saying my opponent cannot get hard-working white people to vote for him. That's a pretty strong statement.
Well,
it bothered a lot of people, and he said it.
And last night, we sat here on this set again and again and said, in effect, well, basically, dumb, uneducated white people,
poor
people,
people you're
voted.
Describing?
Pardon?
Who said that?
Chris, there's a double standard here on her. Look, let's see how Adlai does in Kentucky, when he goes down there with John Edwards.
Adlai?
Yeah, that's his problem, is the Adlai problem.
There's so many straw men in this business. There's Terry McAuliffe on last night blasting away at the pundits who say end this thing, and they're not asking it to end. And there you are, Pat, saying what? Chris, what is your claim here? I'm sorry.
Chris, let me just tell you.
Did we all call them ignorant? I'd like to get a tape recording of that somewhere.
Well, look, you call them they're uneducated, less educated, under 50,000, poor, white. A lot of them seem to be racist. That's what came out of the set last night, in my judgment.
Actually, what was coming out last night was the exit polling, where people were speaking for themselves in that regard. And in every state in the union, we've looked at what percentage of the electorate has 4 years of college, because it has become the leading indicator of how well this guy Barack Obama does.
Well, that's what she said. My coalition is white working class. Let me ask you, what do you mean by rejectionist?
The difference was she said
that he has been, in the case of West Virginia, noticeably hurt by the ethnic issue based upon the exit polling. Yes, that's on the record.
So you're saying Democrats in West Virginia voted for racist reasons?
No, that's a strong word. No, they said themselves, when asked by pollsters on leaving, did race play a part in your judgment? And the answers of a significant number was yes.
Okay,
that's their own statement, not anyone else's.
Did you make the same statement, Chris, about the 92% of black women who voted for Barack Obama in Philadelphia? Did you ask them how many years education they had? Did you say, hey, African-American dropouts? Did you say African-American dropouts are for him?
Pat, these exit polls are conducted on a random basis.
I know they are.
They are not conducted based upon your ethnic profile. They're based upon the random nature of all polling to try to discern the truth of what people are voting on.
All right, what were people voting on? What were the African-American community in Philadelphia that gave him 90% voting on, if not the fact that Barack Obama was one of them? West Virginia, Hillary was one of us. That's the same thing. But West Virginia gets trashed, and Philadelphia's wonderful.
Do you want to respond to that, Andrea?
I don't know where to start. Pat, I was out in West Virginia and having the time of my life, actually, covering the race there and enjoying the people and the interactions. So I didn't hear everything that you were all saying, but I will bet you anything that nobody was trashing people of West Virginia, that the exit polls were being defined and read and interpreted and analyzed. But moving on to the impact of this endorsement, I mean, it could turn out that you're right when we look at the Kentucky results, another state with part of Appalachia, that this is the equivalent of previous endorsements that have not had the impact. The Clinton people would have you believe tonight, that the emails from them, is that this is no bigger than Teddy Kennedy was. Hear me out.
Well, we're going to find out. We're going to find out in Kentucky,
some people would argue that Teddy Kennedy had more of an impact than the Massachusetts returns, that Teddy Kennedy had an impact with other voters.
I want to respond to Pat's thought there. You know, when you've had, it's a thought a lot of people watching right now share with you. I don't deny that. But, you know, when you look at the history of this country, the whole 400 years going back to the beginnings of our country before we had a republic, white people get elected to all the major offices. We've had 3 U.S. senators in history, African-American, freely elected after Reconstruction. We've had, like, a couple of governors. That's about it. Doug Water and Deval Patrick. If you're African-American, it seems to me rooting for somebody from your community and when they have a real chance to be president for the first time in history, I wouldn't read that as a negative sentiment. However, when you're white, and you've always called the shots, to say that you're voting, no, you're voting against somebody who has had quite an impact in this campaign. I think it's a different way of looking at it. You can always say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Pat, the way you argue it is hard to argue. But there is a difference between negative voting and positive voting.
But look, maybe, Chris, the people of West Virginia haven't been running the country. They are working folks, small income. I've been out there. You know what their great cry is? Their kids are leaving West Virginia when they get educated. They go to North Carolina. They're not staying home. These people, they volunteer and fight and die in higher percentages than almost any state in the union. And to sit on a set and hear this, you know, poor, racist.
No.
They're
I'm
less
not saying
educated,
racist.
uneducated
Pat, I'm being careful here. What I'm saying is that in the exit polling, which we conduct pretty randomly, and that's why we do it scientifically randomly, there is a noticeable uptick in people in West Virginia who were willing to publicly state that race played a role in their voting. And you and I know that there's a lot more people that it had effect on than those who openly tell a total stranger that race was one way they thought about voting. I mean, think how hard that is to say. Somebody asks you, did race have a role in your decision-making? And you say to a total stranger, matter of fact, that did. I mean, that's an amazing statement, Pat. And by the way,
they said that if
the pundits didn't.
All right, but you and I know this. If Barack Obama were not an African American, he would have been beaten by John Edwards. He would not be the nominee. It is far more of a positive for him, not only in the African American community, but with the Chris Matthews of the world and in the suburbs, liberal suburbs, far more than it is a negative, and you know that.
Let me get Andrea to get in here. Andrea.
I would disagree with that. I think that it's a real stretch to say that there are enough African-American voters who are self-identifying or supporting Barack Obama. His appeal in Iowa had nothing to do with African-American voters. It was Iowa that lifted him above the other Democrats in the race and set him on this trajectory. It was very smart, targeted, organized campaigning in caucus states by the Obama campaign.
I think your buddies, Chris, Geraldine Ferraro and Joe Biden, they might have been knocked over for what they said, but what both of them have said was a gaffe because it was true.
You know what I hope is true? I hope that the world my kids live in, where they don't think about race as a dividing issue, they don't even mention that their teachers are black, and sometimes they date interracially and don't even talk about it, they don't make a big issue about it. I hope that becomes our country someday, Pat. Do you agree?
Let me tell you something.
Would you like to see that country?
Look,
would you like to see a country where race didn't matter?
I would like to see Dr. Martin Luther, the King's dream of one nation, one people. Chris, that ain't the world we live in, and you've got to describe reality, not what you would wish it to be.
That's why we have random polling. Well, last thought. We do. Pat, you know how these polls are conducted. You can't play nothing about it. You know how it works.
I've
you have
worked
a
with the
random
polls,
polling
too.
And somebody openly states race is one of the factors in how they vote.
You know,
come on.
You know, all of us spend a lot of time on college campuses. You're going to Washington University, a great school, to give the commencement.
One of the best.
I would dare say that the graduates of Washington University, where you're going to give the commencement address, see a very different world than perhaps I see, but certainly
and you and I grew up the same way. And it wasn't, we were much more tribalistic in the old days. And kids today are not tribalistic.
Politics are changing, and these kids are voting, and they are engaged. And Pat, I think we've got to, you know, reboot our systems and look at our circuits.
Well, let me tell you, Chris,
it's a different world
I used to speak at teach-ins at Washington University, and they were elitist, liberals, anti-LBJ in 64 and 65, damn Vietnam and all of that
the world
stuff.
Has changed,
You're not talking.
Pat.